Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. I'm Les Francis, and I was one of the co-founders of Sierra Forward 6 years ago now, and I'm on the leadership team, and uh, uh, got a chance to first work with Jessica 5 years ago, 6 years ago, Jess. We spent a lot of time together traveling what was the fourth CD, and Uh, I will tell you, I was first of all delighted to meet her, and as the campaign went on, she demonstrated incredible candidate skills as well as a deep commitment to the country, to the civic institutions, to the district, knowledgeable about the district, having grown up in the area, and so with you know, she came to that race, as you may recall, with a deep background in national security and knowledge about and interest in other things, but that was her primary background. Since then, she has spent 4 or 5 years, 4 years at least, working for the state of California in forest management, wildfire mitigation, prevention, and whatnot. And so she not only has a deep knowledge of national security, which is hugely important in Congress, the lack of which we see every day being demonstrated by the majority, uh, and now with her background and deep background in forest management and fire prevention and whatnot, obvious an issue of enormous importance to the area. So those issues plus other things, which you'll talk about tonight, make her a terrific candidate in the now third CD. Let me just a couple of points about that. In 2018, when she ran against Tom McClintock, McClintock had won in 2016 by 26 points. In 2018, Jessica did a terrific job and narrowed that margin to 8 points in a district which was very tough, registration wise and voting habit wise and whatnot. And that 8 points was actually very close, and a tribute to her and to her campaign. The new third is actually better. Better in terms of registration. While the Republicans have about a 5 point advantage, they're under 40%. And this will be decided by not only Democrats getting out and voting, but frankly, NPPs, who formed a critical part of Jessica's base in 2018, we know from post-election research, but also the disaffected Republicans. I mean, Kevin Kiley is a MAGA election-denying Trumpster. And we know from all the polling nationally and otherwise, there's somewhere between at least 5 or 10% of Republicans who find that just antithetical to their own beliefs and values. And that is a target group. So when you look at registration and you look at Republican swing voters and you look at NPPs, this is a very doable race. And as Jessica points out, Joe Biden lost the district, what is now the district, by only 1 or 2 points, Jess, I think. So it's very much a doable race. Still an uphill fight, we know it, but it's not impossible by any means, especially with a candidate as skilled and as experienced as Jessica is and proven fundraising ability and all the rest of it. So personally, I'm delighted that she made the decision to run. She'll be a great representative, not just in the House, but representing this district, which McClintock never did, and Kiley is not doing, not representing the real interests of citizens of this district. So Jessica will be a fresh departure from that. I'm not going to say anything more, Jess. I see you're muted. I keep trying to unmute you, but
I'm unmuted.
You're unmuted. Okay. I'm going to turn it over to you for a presentation, and then if we are recording this, and we'll distribute the recording after it gets edited to get the glitches out. And if you want to ask a question, if you will hit the raise your hand uh, icon at the bottom, I will recognize you and call on you to ask questions. If I fail to do that, add it to the chat and we'll try to keep track of that as well. So without further ado, Jessica, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm delighted you were able to join us, and I'm delighted to be involved in your campaign, as I think we all are. So take it away.
Thank you, Les, and thank you everyone from Sierra Forward. It is so fun to see all of you here, and Les, thank you for all of your leadership and hard work. You know, when we started this journey back in what was then 2016, right? Being able to think about how do we mobilize and make sure that every part of our country and our community actually gets the representation we deserve. How do we ensure that we're holding Trumpism in check? And it starts here in the Sierra. And so we are now finishing the journey that we started together. And this is the year that we will actually flip this house. The foundation that we have set is ready, and that will flip this seat. So I am excited to work with you all. I have met most of you, but for anyone I haven't met, I'm Jessica Morse. I'm 5 generations from Placer County. My family came over in covered wagons across the Sierra. They landed in Gold Run, and we still have a gold mining claim that my great-great-grandfather won in a poker bet, in addition to our original forest land. My great-grandma Edith, she manned the telegraph booth at Donner Pass at the turn of the century, and is in some of these sort of stories of pioneer women. And so my family has deep roots here, and I grew up in this community surrounded by lots of cousins and family members, and just learned a deep commitment to service. You know, whenever we had family that was in trouble or in need, or members of our church, or, you know, opportunities to volunteer, we dropped everything and helped. And that was a really strong ethos of my family. So that, you know, it felt really natural then in 2018, in November of 2018, when the campfire broke out in Paradise, and my friend Audrey Denny actually called me and said, "We're in crisis here. We need help." I dropped everything and I went up for a month and volunteered on the ground in the recovery of the campfire. And you know, I saw incredible courage. You know, I saw the one of the school superintendents who was out there in tracking down each and every student and their family, going shelter to shelter, checking out the Walmart parking lot to make sure that she had every student accounted for in her school district, even though her home had burned down. You know, I saw real heroes who were out there keeping community members safe, working around the clock. And I recognized a level of trauma in people that I hadn't seen since I had been on the ground as a civilian in Iraq. And I'll give you one story. There was a woman I met when I was working at the campfire, and she had her kids and she was still in her pajamas because the fire had been early in the morning. And so I was helping her get food for her kids and some more permanent clothes, but I could see that the adrenaline was finally wearing off, and it was starting to hit her what was happening. And I knew that she needed to talk about it. She needed to be able to pause and process, and because I recognized that look. And so I just held her hands and I looked her in the eye and I said, "Do you want to talk about it?" And she nodded. And she started to tell me that when the campfire broke out, she had just dropped her kid off at preschool. She and the other teachers realized that none of the other parents were going to make it back in time to get the rest of the kids. The fire was moving too fast. So they loaded all of these toddlers into her Suburban and they evacuated through orchards. Her car was totaled. She spent the next day trying to reunite toddlers with their parents in the midst of 52,000 people being evacuated. And she did it. She got all those kids out safely, got them back to their families safely. But the toll was visible on her, right? The depth, the exhaustion, the fear, the trauma. And everyone I met up there had a similar harrowing experience of an escape and was demonstrating this same level of trauma. And I thought, how is it that I have spent my whole career trying to end catastrophes, trying to prevent crises, trying to get people safe in the midst of a crisis? And here at home, this is happening. And so I was really honored to be appointed as the Deputy Secretary at the California Natural Resources Agency, leading the wildfire resilience efforts, really asking the question, how do we prevent catastrophic fire? How do we mitigate and minimize the impact of fire? And so I spent the last 4 years leading that effort for the state of California. And I listened, right? I listened to real experts, everybody from the UCs to CAL FIRE to local county supervisors and resource conservation districts. We knew how to solve the fire crisis. We just had never put it together into a whole program, and actually linked it all up together. We had never removed the hurdles that had prevented people from scaling it, and we had never invested in these solutions. And as all of you probably know, right, there's really 3 fronts of fire resilience that we focused on. We developed programs that will sort of thin out landscapes, so, help get our forests and our wildlands and our grasslands ready to accept fire safely so that you don't have these catastrophic high canopy burning fires. We invested in fuel breaks around communities, which is how people evacuate during fires, how firefighters get in and give firefighters a tactical advantage during a firefight. And then we invested in home hardening and defensible space inside of communities so that when embers are falling on neighborhoods, it's not going to shift from a wildland fire to an urban infiltration and destroy the whole town. And so we invested in over 40 different programs that delivered both that direct work as well as the foundations of how do we do that? How do we create the workforce to do this work? How to get the equipment to do this work? How do we improve our processes? How do we ensure that it's science-based? And we invested in this whole program so that when fire hits, that it can burn safely and that communities and homes and families and our ecology are not negatively impacted. I was really proud that we got this program established and developed. It's a $3 billion program over 3 years. In the first year of the program, which was in 2022, we had 1,200 projects on the ground because I worked really hard to cut the red tape so that we could move quickly. We could move at the speed of the crisis. And we did it. And we got those projects on the ground. And what we saw is that even though we had the same number of fires as 2021, we saw the scale of fires reduced from 2.5 million acres burned all the way down to about 366,000 acres burned. We had over 3,300 homes burned or in structures lost in 2021. We got that number down to about 700 in the 2022 fires. We want to get that number down to 0. But what we saw is that the investments we made, even though we had the same number of fires, really paid off. And 2023, as you've seen, has also been a good fire year. I credit the weather on that one a little bit more, but we also had the activities that while we had these better weather windows, we were able to do the most prescribed fire that the state has done, I think since CAL FIRE told me since CAL FIRE was established, which is in like the 1860s. So that is a huge boon for getting preventative fire on the ground, where we had the tools in place to take advantage of this wetter season that we had. And what's great news that you should tell all of your neighbors who are fiscal conservatives that when we invested that first $1 billion in the fire resilience program, we saved $2 billion in the state emergency fund from fire suppression. Again, same number of fires we had to respond to, but we kept them small. And so we saved money, right? So not only is it better for our communities and our ecologies to invest in prevention, it's the fiscally sound way to go. Do you know who did not vote for my $3 billion wildfire program? Kevin Kiley, when he was in the state assembly, he decided, no, you don't need those goats grazing in your neighborhood. He decided, no, you don't need that neighborhood chipping program to come in. He decided, no, we don't need to expand the Conservation Corps to have a full-time Forestry Corps crew to show up and do all of this works in our state parks and in your neighborhoods. He voted against that. And he continues in Congress to vote against wildfire solutions. I'm currently still a member of the Federal Wildland Fire Commission. I had that hat while I was still in my role at the state. But we just released a report. It's a bipartisan commission that included loggers and environmental leaders and people who promote prescribed fire and people who work on smoke health. We had all of these people that are usually across the political spectrum from each other, and we found solutions. We reached consensus because a wildfire is not asking if you're a Republican or a Democrat. It is time for us to find real solutions, and they exist. But we can't make progress until we have a member of Congress who is willing to advocate and push for the federal government to deliver on those solutions. And Kevin Kiley is not doing that. He is instead standing up and trying to get himself points on talk radio and Fox News rather than standing up and solving our problems. And we have real issues here, right? Everything from the quality of our roads and our infrastructure, of access to affordable housing, protection for seniors so that they can age in place safely, right? The issues are deep and broad. We need rural broadband, right? We need rural healthcare. This is getting neglected in our community for somebody who has his own agenda of aggrandizing himself and figuring out who he's trying to point fingers and point blame rather than acknowledging that he has been in a position to actually solve these problems for the last decade and has neglected to do so. But I got in for 4 years and solved a lot of it. So now I need to be able to get in there so we can actually start tackling the federal land, because as you all know, 57% of our forest lands in California are federally owned. And we will not be able to actually create a fire safe and a state that can live with fire until our federal lands are in shape to be able to accept fire safely. So that'll be a big thing that I work on in Congress. But the other thing that's really at stake here is the existential threat we face to democracy. Kevin Kiley has not only been neglecting the local issues that we are facing, he is actively promoting Trump extremism in our community. He is endorsed by Trump. Donald Trump called Kevin Kiley a MAGA champion in Congress, and he is living up to that title. Kevin Kiley is on the Education Committee, and he has been actively getting Moms for Liberty, which is an extension of the Proud Boys, elected to the school boards in Rockland, in Roseville, in Dry Creek School Board. He is leaning in and trying to radicalize our school boards. The Rockland School Board, in turn, voted to ban books, and they are voting to, they voted to out trans children, right? Which not only bullies children, and the most vulnerable children, right, who need to be able to feel loved and safe and be able to have a sense of conversations, and teachers and community members and parents need to feel empowered that their children can have the level of safety that they need at school. But what he's also doing is undermining the community, right? We know that bigotry not only impacts the people who are the victims of that bigotry, but it also undermines and deteriorates the entire community. So what we're seeing in the suburbs in Sacramento is that as these school boards are voting in these extreme policies, that teachers are faced with this terrible choice between their own, so beyond just their own moral compass, they are faced with a choice of, do they violate the state constitution and protect these kids, and do they protect the kids and violate the state constitution, or do they hurt the children and keep their jobs with the school board and stay in line with the school board's, the school district's policies? And so what's happening is that teachers are quitting. And this has been one of the fastest growing regions in the country, in part because the quality of education is so outstanding here. And so what we're seeing is that as the quality of education will deteriorate, as teachers start to leave, then the value of properties and the draw of this community will start to deteriorate as well. So there's multiple layers here that are impacting people across the political spectrum practically as these extremist agendas are going in. For me, it's even more dangerous, though, because as I mentioned, I was on the ground in Iraq for a year and a half at the height of the war. It was there as militias were starting to take hold and take over neighborhoods. And the reason these extremist groups were able to take a foothold in communities was because local leaders who were trusted voices stood up and normalized their radical agenda. And that is what Kevin Kiley is doing in our community. He is radicalizing our community and our neighbors. And it is time for us to say enough. We're all watching the horrors of an autocratic policies come into our into a potential future Trump administration, right? The Heritage Institute released the 2025 plan, and it essentially outlines the path to a dictatorship. And this should not be taken lightly. Liz Cheney put it very well the other day when she said, we cannot sleepwalk into a dictatorship. And what they are proposing would be to have loyalty tests and purity tests for the civil service. They would want to declare martial law on day one and take a stranglehold on the judicial branch. And so what that would do is it would start eliminating rights. And we're seeing many versions of what their agenda is playing out by Kevin Kiley at the school board. And we're seeing more extreme agendas of it playing out right now in Texas, where we watched all in horror as this poor woman and this horrified family had to bear the terrible news of losing a pregnancy. And rather than being able to mourn and grieve in peace and take the medical and have the assurance of knowing that they were getting the best quality medical care to handle that loss of that birth, they instead had to fight the court system, try to get permission, go up against the governor, because the governor of Texas and the Supreme Court of Texas decided that they should decide how that family grieves the loss of that child, right? Rather than letting that family handle it. And what we are seeing is that a window into what a national abortion ban would look and feel like in every community. California's constitution will not protect us. Kevin Kiley in 2022 stood up and told everyone that don't worry, there's nothing he can do in Congress that would override the state's rights for abortion that California has already enshrined. But what he proved right away is that he stepped in and voted for a national abortion ban. He voted to take away the abortion rights of the military. He voted in Mike Johnson as speaker, whose top priority is a national abortion ban. So if we do not flip the House this cycle, we will likely lose the Senate. And we will work hard to make sure we hold the presidency. But in the worst case scenario of Trump winning, the House is our last safeguard against this autocratic future and against the future in which women's rights are taken away, in which trans rights are taken away, in which LGBTQ rights are taken away, in which minorities are persecuted, right? There is a bleak future that is being very clearly outlined for us. And we have the power to stop it. We know that the outcome could be hard and terrible, but we have the authority and the power to actually change and influence this outcome. Because for the first time, this district is winnable. This district is flippable. We are part of the path to take back the House and stop the degradation of our democracy that we are seeing happening before our eyes and that Kevin Kiley is trying to push. This district, like Les said, Trump only won by 1 percentage point in 2020. We've picked up 3 percentage points in Democrat voter registration since then. So this district, for the first time, will be a Biden +2. So that means we can actually work and we can win. So I am excited to be part of this campaign. We are getting national attention. The Sierra is finally the path to flip the House. And I am so proud of the work you all have done because we have been preparing and we are ready for this moment now. We are ready for this moment where the future of the history of this country can come down to us. We only need to flip 4 seats. We are considered one of them. So I am excited to be on your team. I am excited to be working with you on this because there is a lot at stake, but we are not passive. We are not bystanders. We are the heroes that we are waiting for. So I am excited to be with you on this, and I am excited to step up and serve, and we are going to win. So thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Jess. I'm just gonna, well, let me just ask one question. I mean, you've outlined a pretty powerful case against Kevin Kiley. I, I, I don't know how to put this. Every time an incumbent runs, it's a referendum on the incumbent, right? I mean, and so yes, you need to talk about your qualifications and background and whatnot. You have to do that as a candidate. But Kiley is the issue, and Trump is the issue, the overriding issue. How do you plan to deliver that message? I mean, obviously, you meet with groups like ours, and this is retail politics at its best, but we got to get to a lot more. How are you going to do that?
Yeah, I mean, this is really an unmasking of Kevin Kiley. I was talking to a friend in the Tahoe area the other day, and she's like, "Oh, you're running against Kiley? So why? She's like, "But I thought he was kind of okay." And she's like, "Why would you run against him?" And I said, "Well, he's pro-Trump and anti-choice." And she's like, "I hate that guy." And so, I think that's what we have to remind people, that Kevin Kiley has progressively gotten more and more extreme to the point that he is actively undermining our democracy, that he will actively push for a national abortion ban, that he will actively stand by. I mean, he's an election denier, right? That he will stand by and create the fuel that caused an insurrection against our government. And so, it is really crucial that that we stand by and unmask him, because the community does not fully understand how extreme he is, and he is too extreme for this community. This is a district that is 65% pro-choice. Trump is in the low 30s. And so it gives us this power to be able to say, Kiley is pro-Trump and anti-choice, and it is time for him to go.
Good. I'm going to turn to the audience and see if people have questions. Again, if you would hit the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen, that's how we can proceed. And I would ask everybody to the extent you can, keep the questions short. The speaker is Jessica, not any of us. So anybody want to make a comment? Yeah, Roger. Roger, you're muted.
Hello, Jessica.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hi, Roger.
I campaigned for you last time when you ran against Tom.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question is very simple. What do you think about the broadband for our district? I teach through Sacramento State, and I am very crippled by the inability that I have to access broadband. And I know Tom voted against broadband more than once. So what do you think?
Yeah, I am a strong proponent of getting rural broadband, right? It's sort of like the analog to rural electrification, back in the early 19th or 20th century, and being able to ensure that you need to be able to have consistent, reliable broadband to do everything from telemedicine to the teaching that you're doing online school. I mean, it creates a leveling foundation for our country. And so there's a couple challenges with the way the telecommunication laws are written. They were based on sort of radio in the 20s. And so those need to get updated dramatically. We also need to ensure that not only are we releasing the funding that exists, but also ensuring that it can get done quickly. So I'm a strong proponent of rural broadband. I will be a champion for it. It will be one of the things that I'm really pushing for the community.
Okay.
I'm going to, I think what I'll do, waiting as you folks ponder additional questions, we have another candidate on we got a few candidates on the call. Jaron Brandon is a member of the Tuolumne County Board of Supervisors. He's on the call. He's a member of the Sierra Forward Leadership Team. Mike Barkley, you and I have not met, but you're the candidate in the 5th CD against McClintock. Jessica can give you lots of help on how to go after McClintock. uh, uh, Mike, I'm not going to ask you to give a campaign pitch. Well, that's sort of unfair, but do you have anything you'd like to add to the discussion before we turn to others who might have questions?
I did have one question. Actually, I'm here to steal all of Jessica's good ideas, and she has a lot of them. Nathan Magsig, who is supervisor of Fresno County District 5, that was the Creek Fire. You mentioned that when you spoke to the Mariposa group. He wants to see roads widened in fire-prone areas for evacuation and firefighting. How would you feel about that?
Oh, I've been advocating for that in my role for the state. That one of the really horrors of Paradise and the Camp Fire was that people perished on the roads, right? And that's the roads not being wide enough and not having the fuel reduction and the bandwidth on the side. We worked with Caltrans to make sure that they were doing the active fuel reduction. They have about 200,000 acres of right of way, and they are treating that annually now. But what I want to see is to ensure that federal resources are coming to actively support that road widening. This shouldn't be something that is just regulated. It needs to actually be funded, so that communities can actively widen their roads so that you can have safe evacuation in, and safe evacuation out. I mean, not like there's scores of examples, right? You look at the Butte fire down in, where was Calaveras County, where it was a new subdivision, but the roads were really windy, getting people in, and they lost a lot of the homes because the fire engines couldn't navigate the roads, and so. That's really critical. There's another piece on this, though, that there's often a tension between road widening and expanding rural housing. And so what I've seen is that there's some interesting models for creating rural housing that is infill along major roads already, so that when we're thinking about rural development, can you do it along the major interstates, like, you know, take the empty old dollar stores and the strip malls that are getting a little bit dilapidated, and actually build those out into housing on top and retail on the bottom, so that people can go in. A great model is the Truckee Rail Yard project up in Truckee, where it's high density housing that's walkable, that's right along the evacuation route of Highway 80. So that's 200 units that, instead of being ranch houses along a ridge line, are now fire safe. So I think we also need more investment in, I was a big advocate for getting us fire hydrants, right? So in South Lake Tahoe, Kings Beach needs fire hydrants. We have a lot of suburban density neighborhoods, Pollock Pines, that don't have fire hydrants. And so making sure that we're investing in that water infrastructure as well is really critical.
Jessica, Kathy Jackson has asked a question in the chat about the availability and cost of homeowners insurances and as it relates to fire. So let's go to that subject. And then Ruth Michelson, your hand was up. I don't know, it's not now, but it was. So if you have a question, you'll be next. But Jessica, go ahead.
Yeah, Kathy, that's a great question. And so I guess we'll just spend the rest of the night talking about it. Fire insurance and homeowners insurance is one of the things that is really driving up cost of living in these communities. And I saw people in the Camp Fire and over, have to make a trade-off between, if they own their home outright, can they even afford insurance? And I met a woman who had owned her home she's multiple generations in that same home, and couldn't afford the insurance anymore, dropped the insurance, lost the whole house in the Camp Fire. And the max check from FEMA is $39,000 as a total loss payout, which, would keep her in housing for maybe a year. of rent. And so it's just not enough to recover. And so we need to be able to keep insurance in place. There's two ways to tackle the insurance, and you need to do both of them. So one is actually physically reducing the risk. And so what I outlined in terms of the fire resilience program we're doing is incredibly effective at reducing the risk. This is not a straight line, for progress on fire. We're going to get high intensity, windy, dry conditions that will continue to create high fire risk. But we can take the interventions that will mitigate and limit that damage, making it harder for insurance companies to raise those prices. One of the things I've been talking to insurance companies about, and I'm wanting to explore more, is how can we create tools that would force insurance companies to not just be bystanders in creating that resilience, right? Because one thing that I wanted to level set on the science is that homes burn from the inside out in a fire, right? It is embers getting into your roof. It is plants near your window creating such a high heat signature that the window bursts and then flames get in. And so that's why we do what's called home hardening in defensible space, because it removes the potential for the home to ignite. And it's highly effective. But it's also a little bit expensive, right? I mean, if you're just changing your vents, you're fine. That's like $200. But if you have to replace your roof because it's a shingle, wood shingle roof, that's $15,000, right? If you have to remove a bunch of trees right from around your house, those can be like a couple $1,000s a pop, depending on the tree. So, it really adds up quickly. And so I want to see insurance companies. We worked with them on creating incentives and discounts for individual and collective action. But I think it needs to go a step further, which is actively being part of the force that does the defensible space and home hardening in communities. And one of the tools I've been talking about, if you guys don't mind me kind of nerding out for a second on this, one of the tools I've been exploring is federally partnered reinsurance. That's the insurance that insurance companies get. The reason your costs are going up so high is because the rates of reinsurance are through the roof internationally. These are incredibly high. So if we developed federally backed reinsurance and said, hey, insurance companies, you can get a cheaper rate for reinsurance if you then work with homeowners and help put some crews on the ground to go do the defensible space, the home hardening that's needed. And that's cheaper than the reinsurance rates that they would be then paying. But then it changes the insurance companies from passive reactors to the crisis to active partners in delivering the resilience and safety that we need. And so these are the ideas I'm exploring, right? I'm working with some policy experts to kind of suss them out. But this will also be one of these things that we work closely on in Congress when we're elected, because it's impacting every homeowner and it's not sustainable.
And that strikes me as, it raises a sort of related question. The same would be true, it seems to me, of the electric utility industry. What they're having to pay now in settlements, if they had invested in fire safe equipment and wires, what could be done about them?
Yeah. So I worked with PG&E quite a lot when I was in my job, and there are utilities that can do this, right? There are great models. You look at Southern California Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric, private utilities, investor-owned utilities that are doing forest management around their lines. I mean, in Southern California Edison was doing prescribed burns under their power lines, right? They did the preventative maintenance work. PG&E is giant, but also negligent. They neglected to take care of their lines. They have these massive uncared for transmission lines through these wild areas, and they weren't doing anything about it. Part of it is their scale, but part of it is that their incentives and motivations were off. And so, I worked with them, like undergrounding the lines is obvious. I think creating more sort of microgrids where you have power sources more generally available in rural areas. I think the forest waste coming out, the sort of those slash piles that you guys see around, those are good potentials that can actually be converted to renewable natural gas. And pencils out better than electricity conversion. And so could be a really good driver. my challenge is that, when we went to PG&E with solutions on saying, hey, you can actually reduce forest risk, the fire risk, and keep yourself safer, and it pencils out better in your bottom line. But instead, they just went around and were focused on reducing their liability rather than actually improving fire safety. And I'll just give you you probably have seen these examples in your own neighborhoods and communities, or even your own yards, right? They would take standing live trees that aren't a fire hazard, but because someday that tree might fall and hit their line, they took it down. Okay, I'm not opposed to taking down strike trees. Fine. I'd love for them to use arborists or foresters to identify which trees are actually potentially going to fall. But okay, but what they did, and this is what made me so angry, is that they then left the trees on the homeowner's property.
Right.
Huge trees. And then they told me with a straight face, when we levied them with fines and said, you have to remove these trees, they said, no, we don't. That tree is their property. That wood is their property. And I said, you are cutting these to 4-foot slabs, rounds. Millable wood that has any value is 12 feet. What are you talking about? Like they weren't even using they were trying to gaslight us that this is somehow like some great lumber solution that they're giving people. And I said, great, if you want to leave people property of lumber, then get a micro mill for $100,000, put it on the back of your trucks and drive it up and mill it on site. And then you can leave them lumber that they can build fences or whatever with. Fine. Everyone I'm sure would be happy to have a new shed, but they weren't doing any of these solutions. We offered them scores of solutions where they could be a driver of fire resilience and forest health. And as a policy, they said no. So I will tell you that when I'm in Congress and you come complaining to me about PG&E, I will be thrilled to go to their door and push for solutions and push them and create laws that will hold them in check so that they're active drivers of fire solutions rather than active drivers of reducing their personal liability.
Well, I can tell you two things. One, Kathleen Mintert is nodding because this is near and dear to her heart as an issue. The other point I'd make, and Kathleen's a good example of, if you did nothing other than run against PG&E, you'd win with 2/3 of the vote.
It's tempting. I was contemplating an expletive against PG&E as my slogan, but
yeah, all right.
Now that said, right? If PG&E comes to me and says, we want to help be part of the solution, I will be the first one to say, thank you, large, well integrated into the community group. And they're one of the largest employers in the region too, right? They're too big to fail, but they are not willing to succeed either. And it is maddening for all of us.
Well, of the many things that have paved my path to hell is the fact that when I was in the consulting business, I had PG&E as a client, but that was a long time ago, Jessica. So, other questions? Ruth Michelson, are you on, and do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm on here. I mostly just wanted to call attention to some really good questions that are on the chat by that young man. I think his name is Jaron. He's posted a couple of questions that I think would be great if they were asked. And the other thing I wanted to say to Jessica about the trees, just a couple additive things. I wish trees to down a tree was 1,000 or 2,000, but when you have 90-foot pines, it's more like 4,000 or 5,000, and that's not even to clean up the brush. Mm-hmm. The other thing about PG&E is, we have a wood burning stove, and they leave us these 6-foot lengths. And I say to them, look, my husband's 71, I'm 67. We cannot manage this, and we don't have a chainsaw big enough. Could you do something so we could actually use this wood? So that's another problem. It's not just, I guess some people would like lumber, but a lot of us would like to be able to burn the wood.
Sure.
And they leave it in a way that we can't.
Yeah.
It's too big to handle. Okay, I'm done. But if you could ask those questions in the chat.
Yeah, I saw Jaron ask. I want to introduce Jaron anyhow, and I mentioned him as a friend and a key leader of Sierra Forward and a local official, Tuolumne County Board of Supervisors. He is asking a question about FEMA And Jaron, I'm going to ask you to jump on and ask your question directly. Are you still there?
I'll give it my best chance, Les. I got something for welcome to wintertime, so I might be a little bit hoarse. But I wanted to ask about any potential for FEMA reimbursement reform on post-disaster recovery for local governments and communities. It's been a huge challenge, whether it's a fire or the flooding season that we've seen, with a road getting washed out that may be somebody's only access to their neighborhood, where we're often having to front money because it can take years to be able to get that. And I hear that from a lot of local officials, really, whatever the disaster, in that same boat.
Mm-hmm. I hear you on it, and I've seen it over and over. I think FEMA reform is really critical, especially making sure that they are getting supporting people where they are. When someone is traumatized and evacuated from a fire, right, or has lost their home from a fire, you don't have the mental bandwidth to figure out where to feed yourself, let alone do the complicated paperwork that any of us on our best day would struggle with to be able to navigate FEMA's requirements and the scale of information and documentation that they need to be able to navigate it. And so trying to figure out how you can streamline that without creating sort of a system that can be abused by fraud is really crucial. And having worked in international aid, I think there's some good models that are out there that can make ease of access more available to people. And also creating sort of navigators, right? Having people who are sort of like de facto social workers to be able to work with each family on their recovery directly. And to your point on the recovery of communities, right? The post-fire recovery funds from FEMA come slowly, and they're very narrow in what they cover, right? They often only cover physical infrastructure, but they don't or where they think something might slump, off the hillside, they may do some slope stabilization to prevent a mudslide that could impact a community, but they don't do any of that work in the upper forests or anything that's not directly impacting a home. So that could take out roads very easily, right? It can take out, but it also damages the watershed. And so one of the things that I was working on the Federal Fire Commission that I would like to do in Congress is get upper watersheds and forested watersheds classified as critical infrastructure. So it would open up after a fire, the post-recovery dollars for the watershed itself, because what keeps happening is that we have huge fires like the Dixie Fire, the Caldor Fire, and Tamarack Fire, where the upper watershed is damaged, and then you have all of this, you have all of the runoff and the silt come and clog up watersheds, riverways, dams, and it limits our storage capacity for water in the future. It's very expensive to haul out, and the water doesn't percolate properly anymore. The watershed itself isn't functioning. On the footprint of the Dixie Fire, it burned so hot it created hydrophobic soil, which is a fancy word for saying the soil, the sort of permeable top layer of the soil had actually turned to a hard clay because the fire burned so hot. And I was up there when the Dixie Fire was right after it, a couple days after it rained on it. And we got 11 inches of rain, which is what finally put out the Dixie Fire back in 2021. The soil underneath, I took a trowel and looked underneath that hydrophobic soil layer. It was dry. Nothing had bone dry underneath, as if there had been a drought. Nothing had permeated, even though that was enough rain to put out that 1,000,000-acre fire. So I'm digressing, but I feel like FEMA needs to be faster. It needs to actually approach this with the sort of customer service care and the support that is appropriate for people who are deeply traumatized. And we need the FEMA prevention dollars to be focused on our forests and our wildlands so that those are safe and we're not having to pay for the cleanup constantly.
Jessica, there are a lot of things to define the differences between the Republicans and the Democrats. FEMA is one of them. Republican administrations have used FEMA as a political dumping ground, and they've loaded up the agency with people of marginal competence. And while that's a Senate confirmation problem, it is something that a member of the House can also raise hell about with oversight, because it should have top drawer leadership rather than the dregs of a political campaign. So,
Mhm. I also think about, sort of, having worked in foreign aid work, there was a bright line between the groups that were doing disaster recovery and disaster prevention. It's a very different skill set and a different prioritization. And one of the challenges I have with FEMA is that because they are rightly prioritizing the immediate sort of aftermath of keeping people safe and fed and in the aftermath of a disaster, that they don't necessarily have the bandwidth for the long-term recovery that's very thoughtful. And they definitely don't have the bandwidth or the prioritization for the disaster prevention work. And so I think those should be separated out so that you don't have to have this trade-off of like, okay, am I helping people get shelter today or am I saving this watershed? It's like, of course you're going to go to where, prioritize it the wrong way. I mean, the triage is appropriate for what they're doing, but we shouldn't have to have them triage disaster prevention. And I agree with you that they should be staffed properly and with like very capable professionals. Yeah.
Other questions?
Les,
Comments?
there's a couple.
Hi, Mary.
Hi, I'm sorry I'm in the dark. My phone I had to recharge my phone. Anyway.
I'm in the dark most of the time, Mary says.
Yeah, I was in the light before, but we're gone now. We have a couple questions in the chat. One's about campaign funds, and Kathy asks when your next Zoom will be, Jessica.
Okay. And what was the question on campaign funds?
Maybe Mark wants to explain what he means, because I'm not sure there. What will you be using campaign funds on, and what means are most effective?
Oh, I see. Thank you. Okay. Sorry, I just wasn't seeing all the questions. Yeah. Hi, Mark. So yes, campaign funds. This is basically a small startup business that is designed to communicate with about 500,000 people. So who are going to be the voters that we're all talking to. And so what we're going to be doing with campaign funds, we're going to be opening an office. I've got a small staff who are supporting us, and we are going to be then finding different vehicles of communication, right? All of it is going to be everything from the seniors in the suburbs who watch TV, so we'll get some TV ads, the youth who are on social media or doing events that will bring them out, making sure we're getting on rural radio so that our message can get out, but also the field operation where we are knocking on doors, talking to voters, writing postcards, so that we're actively communicating with our neighbors. And the other thing I want to do are house parties. I think are really fun and very effective. And many of you have hosted before, but I hope you'll consider hosting again. So what we host are just invite your neighbors over. I'll come over in your living room, have some snacks because I quit my job to run for Congress. So feed me. And so I'll come over and hang out and just have a conversation, right? And this is the kind of stuff that we can do, all the way through like August. All the way through the campaign, but we can do a lot of these because I'm full-time running for Congress. And just have those conversations. It's a good opportunity for me to listen, but it's also an opportunity to get outside of the 30-second soundbite and actually have a conversation and hear what people are wrestling with and struggling with, and talk through real solutions that'll work.
So Jessica, if somebody on this call wanted to give you a contribution, you'd probably accept it.
This is a great setup. Thank you.
How would somebody do that?
Yes, I'm going to put my link in the chat here in a second. Or if somebody wants to do that for me. So you can go to morseforcongress.com and our donation link is there. And let me tell you guys that I am in a fundraising sprint right now. When somebody asks what I'm doing for Christmas, it is fundraising. Here's the help we need. We are, like I mentioned, we are actually on this national path to flip the House. The DCCC, they recruited me. They reached out and they said, quit your job, live off your savings and run for Congress. And I said, Okay. And I asked them to show me why it was winnable. And they went through sort of those stats that I gave you earlier, that this is a district that is going to go for Biden, that that we're going to get a high turnout among Democrats in the presidential year, almost 90% turnout among Democrats in the presidential year here. So we're going to mobilize people around winning. And but they said to me, they brought me out for the red to blue candidate training. So this is the elite list of districts that are the core path to flip the House. And when you get on this list, it's people in New York and Chicago and LA who are saying, we want to invest in this district. This is how we take back the House. And so to be able to get on that list, they brought me out for the candidate training for it. So we're on track. But they want to see one more fundraising quarter from me before they make the decision on the list. It's not going to come out until the early spring. And so they said, just increase your fundraising target before the end of the year by an additional $100,000. I was like, oh, thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to you too. And so I am in this sprint where I was already stretching to hit my target, and now I have to stretch further. So I still have a little over 150,000 to go before I hit their target. And which, it can break down as that's 150 people who can donate $1,000. That could be the maximum contribution for the campaign is $6,600. So I need to actually find 24 people that can do $6,600. So if I can find 24 people who drive Teslas, please send them my way. And so just help me think through your family and friends. One of the things people are doing right now is that they are putting up on their social media, all I want for Christmas is a new member of Congress and a link to donate to my campaign. So feel free to do that. If your kids say, I don't know what to get you for Christmas, it's really hard, give them the link to donate to my campaign and tell them that this is what you want for Christmas. So anyway, all hands on deck, my friends. It is a full sprint to the finish here. And did we get the link? And I'll put the link in the chat here in just a second. And
we'll send it out too, Jessica. For sure.
But do that before the 31st of December. So think about me on New Year's Eve. And that is what I'm going to be doing, is making sure we hit that target. So join me on that front as well. Let me put the link in here.
And Jessica, when is the next time you will be having a Zoom, so that if people wanted to get their friends onto it?
I don't know when my next Zoom is, but we can just do one. If you want to invite your friends, seriously, you guys could do a house party, but if it's too hard to organize something in person, this is easy. I am happy. If you want to invite 15 friends to come chat with me, I'll do it. So we're all hands on deck here. You guys, Peter did it. Thank you. There's the link to donate. But yeah, happy to show it for Zooms. And if you guys have stuff, especially I'm going to try to position myself in the Tahoe area for that week between Christmas and New Year's. So if there's anybody you want me to meet for coffee, or organize a little holiday New Year's event, let me know. If you want me to come crash your Christmas parties, I will. I can sing Christmas carols, whatever you guys want, I'm in. So yeah, I just am grateful for all of the support and work you guys are doing on this effort. The other thing I want to say is that I recognize, I'm kind of being glib about that $6,600. Most people can't contribute at that level, right? And for those who can, again, please introduce them to me. The other thing that the National Party looks at is the number of individual contributions we get. So even if people are pitching in $5, $10, $25, that hugely helps, because it's helpful for us to be able to say, we have 2,000 unique donors here, right? This is a grassroots powered campaign. The district is investing in this race. So being able to show that scale of in-district donors is really critical. And the number of individual donors we have is also helpful. So just get people to also just pitch in as stocking stuffers too.
Well, and every amount helps, right? Every amount helps. So The other thing we should mention, Jessica, is that unlike what you lived through in 2017, 18, you came out of the California Democratic Party convention with 100% support endorsement. So having the party support is very significant. Going into this race with the United Party is very important. You won't have to spend money to make your case in the primary as much as you did before. You can train all of it on running against Kylie, and I think that's another difference and a good one as we look to 2024. I'm going to see if there are any other questions. Bruce says that when Kylie won the last election, he went to a breakfast of supporters and claimed that God had chosen him to win. Maybe we should get God to re-register, change parties. But if there's anything more we can do, obviously we'll do it. And if you want to make a closing comment, Jess, I mean, you've made your case, but I'll turn it over to you for one last shot.
Well, thank you, Les, and thank you, everyone. I am so honored to be part of this movement. Like I said, democracy doesn't have an autopilot. This is all of us taking the wheel here, that we have agency. If you feel overwhelmed or exhausted or stressed out, or you see somebody who is, remind them that the democracy is us, that we actually have the power to make the change. And when we make this change, when we win the seat, we are not only finally getting us an advocate that we deserve in the Sierra, but we will be changing the course of history. We will be safeguarding the history and the democracy of our country, right? That we are the defenders of the Constitution and all of the rights that are enshrined in it. And so we have that power. So I want you to look at each of yourselves. You are the superheroes, right? In stories, when everyone is faced with hard and challenging times, there are heroes that step up, and that's you. You are here because you recognize that danger. You are here because you realize you have that power to affect change. And so lean in with us, right? It's everything from campaign donations to inviting your friends, leaning in and signing up to volunteer and help. So I am grateful for all of the work that you have already done, because I have been with you through this, right? That we are building on the foundation of all of the work that has gone before. We are not looking back on these campaigns that from before and saying we keep losing. What we are saying is we keep growing, right? We keep building, and this is finally the time that we flip the seat. So I am grateful to each and every one of you. I am honored to be part of this campaign, and I am honored to have you on the team with me. My name's here, but this is our campaign, and this is our moment in history. And so we are going to